Is it spring yet? I mean, it feels glorious this morning, but it has been a tough week to be optimistic about the weather. But as the snow has melted, things are revealed. Have you walked along a sidewalk or a path and seen a random lost mitt that's been placed on a fence post, or a scarf maybe that's been tied to a tree branch? When people misplace clothing, we want to give it back to them. Or have you misplaced something and carefully retraced your steps? Now, I'm speaking of clothing because Palm Sunday has been, well, poorly named. It should be Cloak Sunday, or Coat Sunday, or Cloak and Branch Sunday. Now, why am I saying this? Well, in only one of the four Gospels are palm branches specifically mentioned as being that what was waved as Jesus entered Jerusalem. In today's Gospel reading from Luke, the only thing spread before the path of Jesus on the donkey were cloaks. In Matthew and Mark, the reference is to cloaks and cut branches from nearby trees. And it's only in John that there is no mention of cloaks and only palm branches. Now, palm branches, as we've just found out, are decidedly easier to wave. If this morning we'd all been waving cloaks or coats, we'd be hitting people behind us with buttons and snaps on them. It could be downright unpleasant, maybe even unsafe. Not everything is as expected. We assume Palm Sunday only involves palms. We do it all the time. We assume a characteristic about a person or their motivation based on appearances, on our own biases, on our own desires. We look at a situation to confirm our assumptions, not to openly look or listen without bias. Now, the Gospels agree that Jesus arrived on a young donkey or foal, nothing large and splendid. They also agree that there were large crowds welcoming Jesus. They're singing a version of Psalm 118, verse 26. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. The parade, well, it's leading them through the gates into the fabled city of Jerusalem, the magnificent holy city, the home of the great temple, one of the marvels of the age. The overall effect, however, is one of turmoil. This is not a well-organized parade like, for example, the Santa Claus parade with police and security down the sides to keep the pedestrians on the sidewalks. No, this would be one where people would be darting out in front of Jesus on the donkey, spreading their cloaks or a branch or two. The scene, well, it's not as expected. A king on a lowly donkey with masses of people, no military force to support this supposedly powerful kingship. What did they hope for? Well, they hoped for a king. Blessed is the King, they loudly sang. They had really high expectations for a Superman type person, someone to save them. Save them from what, you might well ask? Well, Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan in their book, The Last Week, speak of Jerusalem as being at the center of what they called the domination system. Sorry, my mic seems to be going on a bit of a parade. These people of Jerusalem, well, they were a subjugated people. First, they were politically oppressed by the Romans. Second, they were economically exploited by the wealthy who held most of the wealth through systems of land ownership, taxation, and indentured servitude, slavery. Third, these systems were legitimated by religious authorities. In the first century Jerusalem, these religious authorities were the temple authorities, the chief priests and elders and the scribes. They in turn owed their power to the Romans, who had bestowed this authority upon the temple leaders. The crowds, they were exuberant in their welcome. They'd heard word of this great healer and preacher, and now here he was there to save them from domination. The crowds, they moved forward with Jesus, like a political protest heading to City Hall or a government building or an embassy. It was probably chaotic, maybe even a bit more chaotic than our Palm Parade this morning. And I've been wondering, you know how you kind of think about things? How did people retrieve their cloaks? Like the equivalent of the mitt on the fence posts. Now, I don't really know why I focused on this point, but people were poor. They wouldn't just leave their cloaks behind, I didn't think. Were these cloaks of different colors? Like a bright red one might be easy to retrieve, but what about a brown one or a gray one? Now, I digress, but not too far, because I've been placing myself in this parade and wondering, how might these people have felt? A sense of hope, of joy, of celebrity that Jesus has finally shown up? Are they surprised, a little skeptical, a king on a donkey? But there was also, as you heard in the gospel reading, a sense of anxiety. The Pharisees had intervened. They are worried about this messianic greeting, that it will attract the unwelcome attention of the Roman authorities. They yelled to Jesus to control the crowds of disciples around him. But Jesus could not control them. They expected so much of Jesus, subjugated. They wanted freedom. They sensed that freedom was this close. They wanted a king, one to replace the harsh Roman emperor who had never tried to understand their culture nor respect it. They wanted their political freedom. Economically, they wanted their fair share based on their own work. Religiously, they would hope that this subversive, somewhat countercultural preaching and healing of Jesus would lead to an expanded and perhaps different image of God for them, because they railed under the narrow, all-controlling image presented by the temple authorities, which was in the temple authorities' own best interest. These people in the parade, they desired Jesus to be the fulfillment of their dreams. He brings hope, he brings peace directly from God. As I think about their journey, I think about our journey over the coming week. We too, we're walking alongside Jesus this week. And like the earliest listeners of Luke's gospel, we all know where this is going. Or do we? Do we know what to expect? Are we open to be surprised by the unexpected, such as a mic that continues to do its own parade? What are our expectations as we walk alongside Jesus this week? Are we expecting help in fighting forces from outside our country and beyond our control? A fight that, may seem futile at times? Are we expecting economic certainty? Are we expecting a fair distribution of resources divided among all people? Are we going along on this journey this week only if Jesus delivers some of what we are asking for? Will we only wave our palm branches if we get what we want? Some of this adoring crowd quickly changed their allegiance over the week. Some of those same people who waved palms, or in the case of Luke, put their cloaks in front of Jesus, some of those same people a few days later, while they're in the square yelling, "Crucify him," a few days later, expect the unexpected. And if you placed yourself in this parade and had a chance to speak with Jesus, what hopes, what desires would you express? Seeking wealth, certainty in your employment, perhaps in your immigration status, financial strength for our congregation, health and happiness for you or your families. We all have some of these desires. We are human. A human journey that I was on a few years ago, many years ago, reminds me to be open to the unexpected. It was called the Street Life Awareness Program, known as SLAP. It was an educational opportunity for people generally associated with churches to learn more about the life of those who lived on the streets. We started with a pre-meeting. In discussion, we began listing the assumptions about what we would expect to encounter in the downtown neighborhood we were about to walk through. In effect, we were being asked to list our biases: drugs, alcohol, crime, poverty, poor living conditions, and the list went on. We then reflected on these characteristics and how they applied to our neighborhoods, to any neighborhood. Drugs, alcohol, crime, maybe a little less poverty in some neighborhoods, maybe some marginal difference in living conditions. We quickly realized that our assumptions of difference were enormously exaggerated. And the walk itself, well, it was a parade of sorts. It too, at a humble beginning, was led by a woman who I will call Jane. We met in a fairly grimy Taco Bell on Yonge Street. Jane was in her 30s, modestly dressed, low-key. We were a group of 6 or 7 well-intentioned and curious people on a warm June night, each a little anxious about what we might encounter on a walk that started at midnight. We headed out onto Yonge Street and along Queen East, passing in front of Met. Jane told her story, one starting with childhood abuse, leading to prostitution as a teenager, defeat a drug habit that dulled the pain of family abuse, a cycle repeated in so many young people. Jail time inevitably followed for Jane, and the cycle repeated itself. As we walked these streets in this neighborhood, she pointed out corners where she turned a trick, places she could get drugs, places she tried to sleep, none of them safe. The story of who Jane was now also started to emerge. She'd started college while she was in jail and completed her degree upon her release, got clean, made a form of peace with her family. Jane now worked in the system, supporting women trying to break this cycle of poverty, drugs, and prostitution. Not what I expected to hear. Jane had a job. She had an apartment. She had friends. She had family connections. In short, the Spirit shone through. She spoke without anger about her previous life. She expressed gratitude for the new life and a resolve to never return to the old. It was one of those times in my life when the love of God shone through unexpectedly at 3 a.m. in an alley just east of here. This was one of my life lessons: to not make assumptions, to be alert, to listen carefully, and to be open to hearing the unexpected. Are you open to hearing the unexpected in yourself? Perhaps it's not wealth you seek. Can you set aside typical human desires and march forward into this dark week? One that will inevitably lead to hearing about trouble, conflict, controversy, treachery, pain, loneliness, sacrifice, and death. In being open to the unexpected, let us not underestimate the journey that we are embarking upon. Maybe we ought not to expect to gain what we need. This Passion Week is about so much more. Let us not underestimate what this week is all about. For it's not about a king seeking power. This is not about a people seeking a king, at least not a human king. There's no room for disappointment or anger as the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, is finally revealed to the disciples and to us. Jesus takes us on this journey this week into a place where a far more powerful force is at work. This journey to the cross, it can bring hope in the form of God's love, open to all. Blessings on the journey. Amen.